Whenever you have completely destroyed motor mounts, you shouldn't be out doing burnouts. It just took out my radiator, and you can see carnage right there. So yeah, it looks like electric fans. That's what we're doing this time on Burnouts and Rotorblades. Welcome to the Burnouts and Rotorblades YouTube channel. Let's go do something awesome. We wrecked my aluminum radiator. This time on Burnouts and Rotorblades, we put an even bigger one on. It was the piece of the fan blade that did all the damage. Well, I ruined it. Technically a fan ruined it. You know, like a fan. What it looks like is a fan hit the end of the fan shroud because of the loose motor mounts that are in there, which also need to be replaced. Bent this down, which created a cup, allowed this to come forward and grab hold of the radiator as it went around a few times, eventually ripping it. And you can see that it was about to do it on several other blades. So this is the new Summit Racing aluminum radiator that I'm going to use. It's the same depth at 3 inches, but it is 25 3/4 of an inch wide by 19 inches tall. In order to make this taller unit work, what we're going to have to do is bend up a custom lower mount, and I'd like for that mount to also be somewhat of like a rock deflector or a mini skid pan, so that, you know, in the instance that something flies up on the road, it doesn't just destroy this thing right away. I should probably mention that 25.75 inches is not exactly enough room for it just to slip down in there. So we're gonna have to do a bit of modification on the K-member that's in there as well.
What's going on here? Huh.
With the K-member clearanced here and the same on the other side, it's time to bend up some sheet aluminum so that we can support this radiator from the underside. We laid everything out with layout die on sheet aluminum and then used a plasma torch to cut it crooked. Took it over to the sheet metal bender, and this is the final result. It should support the radiator while guarding it against rocks and dings and curbs. With the radiator removed and the help of a small clamp, we can mock up our lower radiator bracket and hold it in place with some clecos, and we'll come back later with some riv nuts and bolts for the final installation into our core support. Our radiator support will mount directly to our fan shroud, so let's start working on that next. So I want to mark out an area around the water pump pulley where it's kind of a no-go zone, so I know how much area I have to play with whenever I install the fans. Alright, now that we have our bullseye, we can take it out and measure for what size fans are going to fit. The area in front of the Vega's water pump is very limited, both by the height and diameter of fans it could support. And so I decided I would split up the fans rather than going with a larger fan setup. What I designed was mostly inspired by city buses that I had seen that use multiple fans to cover up as much area of the radiator as possible. After a bunch of research, I decided on the number of 2000 CFM to be my target number to be sure that it was enough to cool down the engine. I settled on a combination of two Spall fan models. One is a 7.5 inch, which draws 407 CFM at a 6.7 amp draw, and the other is a 5.2 inch Spall fan, which draws 342 CFM with only a 2.2 amp draw. The way I stacked the fans up was on either side of the radiator, putting my first stage at the radiator's inlet and the radiator's outlet so that it'd be effective after the thermostat opened, and then I'd have the second stage come on later to prevent from overheating. That way I don't ever tax my charging system. We'll worry about the charging system later, but let's get that fan shroud built. Well, that looks pretty well sorted out, so let's go ahead and move on to the electrical system, starting off with our alternator. It's very unlikely that our stock 62 amp alternator would have been up to the task of taking care of this charging system along with all the other car requirements, so I opted for this 140 amp Tough Stuff alternator to replace it. And now it's time to address something that's always bugged me about this Vega, and that's the way the alternator is mounted. Alright, so you saw in the old setup, this alternator is held in some really hokey ways. I've gone ahead and gotten rid of, you know, all the 37,000 washers and nuts and all that kind of craziness that was behind all that stuff, and I ended up needing another bracket that sits down below. So my options were to order a lower bracket that went for either exhaust manifolds or a lower bracket that went for headers. So this project is officially snowballed, and I ordered these Sanderson headers actually a while back, but now I just don't really have a good reason to not install them, so they're gonna get installed. Now to support this new alternator, we have to have some wiring upgrades. We're gonna swap out this rickety one for this nice, neat one, and we're gonna solder it the correct way. Now that the new alternator pigtail and main power wires are in, we installed this terminal lug for convenience. For some reason, all the wiring is on one side of the car and the battery is in another state. Thanks, Chevy. See the little adhesive coming out of the backside?
Yeah.
That's how you know it's good. Now that thing is smoking hot, so what I'm going to do is touch it immediately. Remember how I said I was going to touch this thing immediately and it was going to burn the shit out of me? Guess what I just did?
What happened?
Battery cable was run from the terminal block we just installed all the way over to the starter lug so that we could transfer power back and forth from the battery without having to relocate it to the other side of the car. I ordered and used this really sweet battery terminal crimper to finish off that battery cable. However, it was only after I had struggled to use it that I figured out it was designed to be put in the vise. From there, the power distribution is handled by this fuse and relay panel mounted to the inner fender on top of this aluminum riser bracket. Rubber fender beading was added in addition to the wire sleeve to prevent chafing. From the relay panel, power wires are run out to the fan circuits via weather pack connectors. I typically also solder on the weather pack crimp connections in order to prevent pulling the wires out of the back of the connector, and take it one step further and heat shrink with adhesive heat shrink the wires into the back of the connector as well. All the wiring in the car is finished off with this woven wire wrap, and all the ends are wrapped with this self-adhesive tape. Control for the fans is handled by a Dakota digital electronic fan controller mounted to the side of the center console. I've created a whole separate video on how to program and do your initial setup on the Dakota Digital PAC 2750. I would highly recommend that should you order this electronic fan controller, that you also download and read through the installation instructions, because that is the only way you're going to know exactly what temperature sender to order for your installation. I mistakenly ordered this unit, but this is the unit I needed. Having the wrong temperature sensor will cause you a lot of headaches. Son of a biscuit. Because I wanted a separate temperature sender for both my gauge and the control through the Dakota Digital fan controller, I needed another mounting location to put my temperature sender. So I ordered this adapter from Amazon, which fits under the thermostat housing. So I was fully warned about this. If I go from the top of the sender unit to the base of the sender unit, I get 150 ohms about, alright, at this temperature. But if I go to like another part, like the engine block, now it's 500 ohms or more. It grounds from here to here, but it doesn't ground from here, from this base piece, to anywhere else. And one of the reviews I read online said that that was because of the anodizing that went off there and you should scrape it off. But what I'm going to do instead of that is install a ground wire. Now 171 ohms. If I touch the block, 171.3 ohms. And that may have fixed the problem. Yes, I just cut up my brand new radiator, but it's for a good reason. Some of you may have noticed that the clearance between the alternator and the radiator's inline is, well, it's not clearance enough. The alternator pulley will definitely hit the radiator hose on the inline. So we've hacked off the end of the radiator hose inline, cleaned it up, reshaped it with these wire cutters. The last thing we did was install this rubber fender beading around the core supports opening to protect the radiator. And now it's ready to go back together with plenty of clearance between the radiator and the alternator. Well, after all that work, the fans are doing great. It stays cool at an idle whenever you're sitting parked, and that's exactly what I wanted from the fans. However, whenever you're driving down the highway, it just keeps climbing up. And the problem is, I think that there's a big section in the middle of the radiator that's not getting any airflow. Now, if you look at some of the Durrell or Master Cool fan shrouds that have, big gaps where there's just sheet metal, what they do is they install like a little flapper. So I've ordered this stuff right here. It's an 1/8 inch thick rubber sheet, and we're gonna cut it up and we're gonna make some flaps that go over the radiator so that whenever you're driving on the highway, air can push through, lift that flap up, but whenever you're parked, that flap will fall down and the air will be forced to come through the radiator as opposed to through the holes adjacent to the fans, because that flap will seal off the holes, hopefully. I thought with this for a while, and I think we're also going to go ahead and take this time to change the water pump, and that's for two reasons. First and foremost, we've changed literally everything else in the cooling system, so it only makes sense to put a water pump. Secondly, I'm a little bit lazy. If I remove the water pump, it'll let me lay the fan shroud back without taking the whole radiator back out. So it's kind of a double win, a little bit, maybe. Things you should know about the water pumps. They come in two styles for Chevy small blocks. You have the short pump and the long pump. You can tell whenever you look in the car if you have a short pump by the distance between the timing chain cover and the water pump's backing plate. If there's a big herkin space in there, you have the bigger water pump. If there's almost no room, like the Vega has here, then you have the short water pump. Also, there's a shorter distance from the mounting position up to the pulley flange. Is 6.5 inches on the short water pump. Everything else about the water pumps is exactly the same. There's really no difference except that distance. If you're running into clearance issues like I was, go ahead and throw a short bodied water pump. Now you're gonna have to mess around with pulleys and stuff like that to find the right stack up for belt alignment and whatnot, but considering I have the one on there already, I don't have to do any of that. Oh God, I hope this fixes it. Wouldn't it be weird if I wasn't recording that whole time? Just out here talking to myself. Oh no, it's everywhere! So the Vega's doing great. Cruising down the road, the temperature is at like 190 something, but it's, you know, it's 100 degrees in Vegas right now, so that's not really a surprise or a shock. It drives straight. I can take my hands off the wheel. Heck, I could let Vlad over here drive if he wanted to, and it would be just fine, because all the suspension upgrades we've done, the exhaust, the cooling system, it's all awesome. And now I think we're gonna take it out and do a little bit of, you seem bored. Why are you bored? Are you bored? You're bored?
Yeah.
So do you want to do something that makes you not bored? Was that pretty cool?
Yeah.
You were bored a minute ago. What happened? Don't forget to subscribe if you like the content and want to see more like it. And as always, thanks for watching.
That was
So cool?
yeah. How about we do it somewhere else, like here?
Do it right here? Son of a biscuit.